Hello and welcome to the Untalented podcast. Today I'm really excited to welcome Elliot Vredenburg, who's currently working as a design director at Mother Design, who's agreed at quite short notice, which I'm really happy about. But so looking forward to chatting all things design, and I guess New York kind of centric design. But welcome, Elliot. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. It's been a busy week. Came back after some time off,
Yeah.
so playing a little bit of catch up. But yeah, it's been good.
I think you were saying you perfectly timed your own vacation to coming back to the Mother Design ski trip.
Indeed, I did.
So
So
that was well done for that. I
yeah,
think that takes some careful execution.
yeah, it wasn't intentional, but it worked out.
How was the ski trip?
It was great. I hadn't been snowboarding in about 17 years,
Okay.
so I was not as good as I expected myself to be. But yeah, it was fun.
Yeah. Where did you guys go?
Up to the Poconos,
Okay.
a place I had never been before. So
Nice.
yeah.
Well, I guess the origination of this podcast was to give people who don't always have a voice to sort of speak openly about topics. And I think for us, this podcast really started accidentally. We were having lots of rich conversations with creatives, and a lot of that information is sort of kept behind closed doors. And I think the opportunity for us to speak to people like yourself who are doing great things at brilliant agencies is a really nice way for those outside of the industry or people who are interested in working in agencies like Mother Design to kind of get more rich information. So yeah, really looking forward to this one. I think I'd like to kick things off by asking you who the first person was that made you feel talented.
Yeah, I mean, there's an easy answer to this one, and I'd imagine this would be the same for a lot of people. My parents,
Yeah.
of course. But I mean, I guess the I don't know, more thoughtful answer, maybe more useful answer, is that I had a teacher in high school named Mr. Hayes. I don't even know what his first name is.
Yeah.
But he was my media studies teacher, and it was the first time I was like really allowed to go off brief,
Yeah.
more or less. Like, it was like write an essay about the history of something cultural, and it was like, okay, I'm going to make a 30-minute documentary about the history of hip hop, and I'm going to voice over the entire thing. And I mean, he responded well to it. So I mean, it was often like, really loose project briefs,
Yeah.
and we were allowed to do what we wanted, which was new to me at that point. And like for that to be responded well to was like really validating,
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
I don't know.
And how old were you when this was happening?
I mean, grade 10, so what's that, like 16, I
Yeah,
suppose.
nice.
So yeah.
The history of hip hop sounds like something that I'd probably enjoy reading as well. So maybe selfishly, he was happy that you did that.
Yeah, perhaps. I don't know.
So, and I think that when you were kind of at that point, did you know you wanted to go into graphic design? Was kind of just creativity a thing that you seem to enjoy?
I mean, I had no intention of going into graphic
Mm,
design at that point. I mean, there were things that I was interested in, like that were kind of part of visual culture. I mean, like I was really into skateboarding, so I was reading a lot of skateboard magazines. Mass Appeal magazine was big for me back then. I mean, skate videos, mixtape covers,
yeah.
like that sort of thing. I mean, ultimately, I was like, yeah, 15, 16 with a pirated copy of Photoshop. And like through that, got to yeah, really like teach myself how to essentially replicate the things I was seeing in
Mm,
culture. So I think that, like those different elements plus like graffiti
yeah.
were all kind of things that eventually led to this. But at that point I was more interested in, I don't know, music than I
Yeah.
was
Yeah, it's
that.
that it's interesting that I hear a lot of graphic designers who had a fascination with kind of skate
Mhm.
magazines and skateboarding because I think it had such a unique kind of visual language that was non-conformist in
Mhm.
lots of ways, which I think inspired lots
Yeah.
of designers.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was somewhat like countercultural at the
Yeah,
time,
yeah,
getting chased by security guards and that sort of thing. So I mean, it again like introduced you in a way to like going against the grain a little bit. I
Yeah.
think now it's been kind of co-opted into like mainstream culture or just been accepted as part of it. I mean, it's in the Olympics, I think,
Yeah.
for the first time
Mm.
in a few years. So I mean, at that point, I think that that whole world was
Yeah.
like yeah, pretty rich for inspiration.
Absolutely. And so that's kind of your early motivations into sort of obviously
Mhm.
how did you get there? What's the
Um,
story?
I mean, do you want the short answer or the long answer?
Let's go for the short one.
Okay, well, the short answer is I was working at a studio with friends and kind of felt that I had, I don't know, like reached a kind of like stasis or like a limit to the growth that I felt that I could achieve at that point. And a recruiting firm came along
Mm.
and brought me over to Mother Design.
Yeah. And I think that so in terms of your background, had you always been like interested in that kind of brand creation?
I mean, I had a pretty circuitous route to brand design. I mean, I mean, graphic design school was the only college that accepted me. So, I mean, that kind of like started my journey towards this. And I mean, yeah, I like went to Cal Arts, got a master's in critical theory. That was an MA, and then when I was immigrating to the US, I'm from Canada. They needed a physical degree, so I asked Cal Arts to send me my physical degree,
Yeah.
and instead of an MA, they sent me an MFA. So I was like, okay, well, I'll continue working in graphic design. So, I mean, I think that that kind of brought me back into the world, especially when I had to leave the country in order to immigrate. Some friends of mine
Mm.
said, "We're starting a studio. Would really like you there at the very beginning." So, I mean, working with your friends is, I guess, the thing that kind of brought me back.
Yeah, and I think that you raised a really interesting point when we spoke yesterday around like the working with friends. You have more of a there's a decision making process with projects, and that we can touch on this a little bit later.
Mhm,
But I think working in a small collective really shapes people's journeys
mhm,
into like what they want to do, and then I think that often you find out, oh, actually, I'm good at this thing.
mhm.
I should sort of pursue that more. How did you find the shift from working with like friends to working in an quite a renowned agency like Mother?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it was definitely a bit of a I mean, it's every day is a learning experience, right? Like you're always trying to like glean something from whatever you're doing that particular day. But I don't know. I mean, I think that just being exposed to new stimuli in general is like the thing that like kind of pushes the work forward. And I mean, yeah, it's super inspiring to be around talented people every day,
Yeah.
whether you have known them since college or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So in terms of like, we've got a bit of a vested interest because we came to New York this time to run a workshop called Nobody Wants to Work
Mhm,
for You, and I think that a lot of the questions that we were sort of posing in that workshop were around like the future of
mhm,
creative, the future of design.
mhm,
What does an agency look of the future of 10 years
mhm,
time look like? So the questions are kind of be themed around that area.
mhm,
But yesterday you said something that was really interesting that I'd like you to sort of expand on was
mhm.
that bad design is good.
Mhm. Yeah.
So could you
Um,
talk to that?
yeah, for sure. I mean, like this is kind of a mantra that I've had for a while now, and I mean, you learn kind of one set of principles when you're in design school, and that's like, the crystal goblet that, design is supposed to kind of like I don't know, elevate the content that it's communicating, that simplification and like transparency are real like virtues. But I mean, quite frankly, I think that's kind of boring. And like there are a few people that I think really did this. There's an artist named Enzo Mari who yeah, Italian artist. And I mean he called designers scoundrels. So I mean What he tried to do was this I don't know, design it yourself movement.
Yeah.
So I mean, this was about kind of like, instead of simplifying things, it was like over reducing things so that you're almost being like antagonistic. And I think like that is technically bad design. He
Mm.
made things harder to use. Like he wanted people to essentially like learn rather than follow instructions.
Yeah.
Um, and you see this other places, like, I don't know if you know, like the Dogma 95, like filmmaking movement,
No.
Lars von Trier. I think he's probably the best known director to come out of it. But it was all kind of like creating obstacles that like really make you kind of notice the thing in front of you. And I think like, that's kind of the dichotomy between like what is considered good design, which is supposed to be frictionless, and what is often bad design. Like if you look at a door, there are kind of two ways that you use it. You push it and you pull it. And there are two kinds of handles, one that's designed for pulling, one that's designed for pushing. So whenever you encounter a door with like that is a pull door with a pull handle, then that's transparent design. You don't even notice it. Whenever you see a door that has a pull handle and you try and pull it and it's actually a push, then like you have to kind of stop in your tracks and like notice where you're at. And I don't know. I think that ultimately kind of shows that difference between I don't know what I don't know, UI UX designers do. I mean, good design is great whenever it's used for a specific purpose. But what we do, I think, is ultimately would be termed bad design, because it's not transparent, it's
Yeah.
not frictionless. You're
Yeah. Yeah.
intentionally trying to create those like kind of, I don't know, uncomfortable moments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think that you know, you when you were explaining it, so kind of making people stop in their tracks is a very kind of brand and advertising
Mhm,
type of way of working. You don't want to design something that's not going to be noticed because
mhm.
essentially you're trying to get new customers or consumers of that thing. So yeah, it's really interesting. I've never heard someone sort of um say it in that way. I think I'd like to touch a little bit into sort of where in terms of the future. I think everyone's being much more socially conscious around the projects that they take on, the
Mhm,
brands they work with. Yesterday you mentioned kind of like a vote system that
mhm.
had happened. Could you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, at a previous studio that I worked with, like every designer had essentially veto power about working on a project.
Yeah.
Like if it's something that they felt personally uncomfortable with, then they wouldn't have to work on it. And ultimately there were some, I don't know, more contentious projects that
Yeah.
like it was a studio wide, like, I don't know, direct democracy where, if the majority of people were like, or I think it was like on consensus, if everybody was like, no, I don't feel comfortable doing this, then we wouldn't do it. And I think like, I don't know, that's one of the things I think is most important, especially going forward into the future, where, we're trying to be more socially conscious. We're trying to be more thoughtful about the projects that we take on. And I think whenever that comes from the bottom up, then like it's even more meaningful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that Mother Design specifically has always done great work with socially conscious brands. I
Mhm.
think I don't know if you work on the Nud project? Were you
No, that was the UK
That was the
office.
UK
Yeah.
guys, yeah. And I think that it's projects like that that I think other designers in the industry would love to work on,
Mhm,
because not only are you using your skills to make something look
mhm,
great and stand out, but hopefully you're helping like
mhm.
a great cause. How does that differ in terms of the way that business enters the agency? Is there different like pathways that more socially conscious businesses follow?
I mean, I think that ultimately, like, something that I was thinking about on my way here was, you're asking about how agencies kind of differentiate themselves, and I think whenever you look at any agency's kind of mission statement, brand purpose, or
Mhm.
whatever, they are essentially all the same, and they're all essentially saying, we are different, but nobody's actually doing anything differently. And I think, it's great to work for the big brands of the world.
Mm.
Like, if it feels great, you're having an actual cultural impact. But at the same time, like, working for smaller brands and actually kind of, or I mean, nonprofits, whatever, um, you're essentially kind of giving them a leg up, and especially by investing in those smaller companies directly. Like, mother worked with this brand, Syria, who makes non-alcoholic beer.
Yeah.
Basically, they're a very small company. Whenever they came to us, and in exchange for doing the work, we invested in them.
Yeah.
And like, I think that that's actually doing something different.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, there are other kind of things in that world that we've worked with. I mean, I think, really working with people who are at the forefront of trying to do something differently.
Mm,
I think that that's kind of the most important part of,
yeah.
yeah, trying to differentiate.
I imagine there's also some like challenges when a brand or a brief comes to the
Mm,
agency where someone's trying to sort of like greenwash their way into the
mm,
building.
yeah.
Um, is there like have you had experiences where a brand has come to you or
Mm.
the agency and been like, "Oh, we're all about this and we're all about that," and actually it's not the reality?
I mean, yeah, and I mean, like, I don't eat meat or dairy.
Hmm.
I don't believe in industrial animal agriculture, and yet I have rebranded a meat packing company.
Yeah.
So I think like there are lots of situations in which like uh, in that situation where you're essentially trying to make them feel more local, more friendly. I mean, it's not necessarily greenwashing, but it's like culture washing or something,
Yeah.
um, where you're kind of disguising a brutal reality into something that appears friendly, kind of like more approachable, etc. And I mean, I'm not really a fan of that, but
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I guess also the a lot of the time when a brand will want to rebrand,
Mhm,
they could have come through some interesting social, situations where they're
mhm.
not standing out in the same way. I'm sure that's not a unique case where brands are trying to diversify because public opinion of them isn't that strong.
Yeah, of course. I mean, like, there are lots of examples, right? Like, um, I don't know. I don't want to call it any in particular, but yeah, there are so many examples in which like that's essentially what you're being tasked with, and I think honestly, it's one of the a big part of the industry is like essentially changing perceptions of things that may not have the best one to
Yeah.
begin with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a topic that we spoke about yesterday, which seems to be really consistent in
Mm,
lots of people in the branding
mm,
space, is how the inability sometimes of agencies to onboard their work
mm,
appropriately with brands.
mm.
Where do you think the issue is there?
I mean, I think it's a few places. I mean, I think you mentioned yesterday that like a lot of work is kind of created for the case study. And then it's kind of just like a highly curated selection of like the best examples of these different elements working together. And like you actually see it out in the world and it does not look like that case study. And I think, the best brands, the most enduring ones, the ones that I personally like to work on are the ones that kind of persist. And the way they do that, and the way that I try to do that, is instead of creating like a box, because most brand guidelines, which is the primary deliverable for every project, are essentially a box that you have to stay within. Like, we'll show you how to do it. You just keep doing this.
Yeah.
And instead of that, uh, what works in terms of like being able to hand these tools over and it to work not just 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, but 50 years down the line,
Mm,
is providing like really elemental tools that kind of form a nucleus or like a core, a seed that those tools can be like the way those tools are used can be reinvented,
mm.
but the tools don't need to be reinvented, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they can evolve, they can respond to culture, essentially.
Absolutely. So there's room for maneuverability within the guidelines of that
Mhm.
brand. Yeah, because I guess like at this workshop on Tuesday, we a lot of the questions were kind of pointed around what will the industry look like in 10 years?
Mhm.
How do you think things are going to shift in the next 10 years?
I mean, I think I think again, like, um, uh, agencies need to do something different. um, I think, you could say a lot about remote work. You could talk about AI. You could talk about freelancing, etc. But I think ultimately it's a matter of actual differentiation and actually doing things differently. Because I mean, the agency model as it currently exists is on its way out.
Mm,
And like to do something that isn't what you've been doing for the past however many years, is kind of the answer of like actually making people want to work for you, I think.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that, uh, a lot of on people's minds at the moment is, the creative industry has, a lack of more diverse people from a
Mhm,
range of backgrounds. And I think that the barrier to entry, especially for design, is very
mhm,
high. But the only way to kind of excite a new generation of
mhm,
people is to make agencies more exciting for them,
mhm,
because I think that the example that we used, when we sort of first launched Nobody Wants to Work for You is, you'd have kids out of school lining up outside agencies to work for free.
mhm,
And I don't think they have the same sex appeal anymore for
mhm.
like young people coming out
Yeah.
of why do you think that is?
Honestly, from my own experience, I think it's kind of um we're not in the Mad Men days anymore. um and I mean, I think with that we become more of like a service industry in many ways. Like there's been kind of a loss of kind of, I don't know, um a perception of expertise, ultimately like a trust and respect.
Mm,
Like, a lot of people, I mean, I went through 8 years of school and like 15 years of design,
mm,
to get to where I am. And like the intention there is to be the expert, to and something that is often repeated is like you wouldn't go to the kitchen at a restaurant and tell a chef how to make your meal. You wouldn't tell a plumber how to fix your plumbing. And I think that that's something that has been kind of an increasing trend. And it's a similar kind of theme to unpaid internships
yeah,
and that sort of thing, where you're essentially kind of executing someone else's ideas rather than kind of trying to come up with ones of your own that
mm,
are kind of are respected,
yeah,
are
yeah.
like I don't know, understood. Yeah, I guess that's kind of
Yeah.
like
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that I think there will be significant changes, but
mhm,
what that actually looks like, because it seems like you've got especially within the branding industry, you've got big beasts that take
mhm,
on, big international rebrands, and then
mhm,
you've kind of got this smaller, sort of more independent
mhm,
agencies who are you're servicing. Then you've got this kind of middle ground that
mhm,
there's lots of grey in that area. You've got
mhm,
agencies part of big networks in that space, but
mhm,
I think that it's the industry from a size of agency perspective is so diverse now.
mhm,
I mean, even in New York, you've got loads of agencies popping up every day. So, and I think that's exciting for the
mhm,
future that people are kind of coming up and trying different stuff. Um, I guess for you as giving someone advice who is sort of entering the industry who
mhm,
maybe hadn't had the traditional schooling, or
mhm.
what do you think young designers can do to kind of make their way in?
I mean, I think there's ultimately a few things. I mean, working for things that you want to do and making work that you want to make,
Mm,
I think is a big part of it. I mean, in terms of like finding inspiration or like I don't know, kind of like things to pull from. I think ultimately there's a lot of people doing the same thing. I think that social media plays a big part in that. I
mm.
mean, ultimately, I think you should like get off social media and get onto eBay. Like,
Yeah,
find something that you've never seen before
yeah,
and look at that. I mean, yeah, I mean, watching old skate videos like Spike Jones videos for girl skateboards, I think is a great one.
yeah.
But I mean, just finding references outside of what we do. I think also doing things that are not what we do is a big part of it.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't know about entering the industry. I mean, again, I had a pretty weird route getting into it.
Yeah.
But that was essentially from doing things that weren't graphic design,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is what I now do. So
Yeah, yeah. No, it's true. I think that one thing I've definitely noticed about the New York design scene, and probably actually the US design scene, is that junior designers are much better at just doing spec work,
Mhm.
and spec work that hasn't been done in their education,
Yeah.
that has been done just off their own back. And it's really high quality, some of it, which I
Mhm.
think if I would compare that book to someone in London, I don't think juniors are doing that quite in
Mhm.
the same way. Is that like a cultural thing here? Is it, do you think?
I mean, I think that especially for younger designers who are working in agencies that are working for big brands, like they are essentially doing that thing where they follow brand guidelines,
Mm,
like do as I do, kind of thing. So I think that without that opportunity to like work for a smaller brand,
mm,
work for, I don't know, something they
yeah.
care about, then you're kind of forced to create work that is what you want to do. So that's a lot of like speculative, like rebrands for companies that you're not actually rebranding.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, yeah, a lot of portfolios have that work in
yeah.
it, and you're gauging them not on the work that they have done for someone, but
Mm,
work that they've done by themselves.
yeah.
So I mean, maybe it is a cultural thing. I'm not as versed in the UK
Yeah, yeah.
creative world as you are, but yeah, it's definitely something that happens.
Yeah, for sure. It's always, I think it's always really impressed me, but I think that, you know, being able to do that within, you have to be passionate to go home from an entire day of working on brand guidelines to then come up
Mhm.
with your own sort of creative, I guess, case study.
Mhm.
Um, we touched on this a little bit yesterday about the differences between art and design, and I know
Mhm.
we kind of, but where are you on that kind of sliding scale?
I mean, I think it is a sliding scale. Ultimately, I
Yeah,
think that like it depends on the approach, it depends on the intention, it depends on kind of the outcome. I mean, I think kind of the inverse of like bad design is good is that good art is bad design,
yeah,
like for the same reasons. And I think, a lot of good design is bad art. But both things can be true at the same time. I
yeah,
mean, another cliche would be that like anything can be art. And I think, depending on your approach, I mean, lots of designers that I know of are really creating art
mm,
more than they're creating design.
yeah,
I don't know. And there are artists too who are creating design in order
yeah,
to
yeah, yeah.
create art. So I think it is a sliding scale, and I think it depends on the project and the intent
Mm,
ultimately, which is where like that defines wherever I fall on it.
for sure. Yeah, no, I think it's there has to be a level of functionality in
Mm.
design, because then if it was completely non-conformist, you couldn't
Yeah.
you wouldn't, it wouldn't be workable for you,
Mhm.
for the consumer. But I guess for, I get like future thinking, and obviously this is really on the top of our mind. Do you think there's like things that about the industry that's made it lose its charm? Like we're
Mhm.
seeing lots of people go down that freelance route,
Mhm.
starting small independents, especially in that branding space.
Mhm.
Do you, do you think that's the reason people are doing that?
I think that autonomy is honestly the biggest part of it,
Mm,
being able to kind of opt out when you feel like it. So I think there is kind of that ethical side of things.
mm,
I think there's also kind of the kind of loss of expertise, I suppose.
mm.
That's another big part of it. Especially when you consider like the work that was created, even the '90s, the '80s. Um, so I think I don't know. Those are for me the two primary reasons why I've gone freelance in the past
Yeah.
to be able to kind of pick and choose
Mm.
the projects that I work on. But I mean, I think that there's a way through that. I'm not sure what it is, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. No, and I think that, there's always going to be room for those kind of small
Mhm.
independents. And I think that, that's where some of the greatest agencies have started from, I
Mhm.
guess, originally.
Mhm.
Um, I guess like get more thinking about kind of future stuff. Like, would you ever start your own agency again? Like, what do you see your like future journey being in design?
I don't know. I mean, I'm open to any possibility. I mean, like the v- one like I don't know pathway that comes to mind is where Acne Studios came from.
Yeah,
They started as a graphic design
yeah,
firm, which then like kind of transformed into teenage engineering.
hmm,
So I mean, those two things are, I mean, to some degree, graphic design, but
yeah,
not really.
yeah,
So I think that I'm open to whatever possibility kind of like evolves from what I'm currently doing.
mm,
So I mean, yeah, graphic design is fun, but
yeah.
it's not my entire life.
I think there is something amazing about people who are designers because there seems to be you can sort of mold your skills into different
Mhm,
places. You know, they're almost some of like the best. You know, we've got a couple of ex designers who work at Unknown, and they'll always have a solution to like some random problem
mhm,
by like jumping on Photoshop or like Illustrator and just like sorting
mhm,
something out.
mhm,
And I think that is just a really valuable like skills that you can push like through to any
mhm,
lots of adjacent industries.
mhm.
What is like what is like what frustrates you about the industry now? What you know
Yeah, I mean, just to follow up on your
yeah,
last point, I mean, I think that's something is that's kind of an analog to that is like um, going over to the house of like an industrial designer
mm,
or an architect.
yeah.
Often their furniture is like made from like cinder blocks and like two by fours or like milk crates
Mm.
and like plywood. And I think yeah, it is that kind of like being able to build something out of the tools you have at hand.
Yeah,
Just like someone being able to solve a problem
yeah,
by I don't know looking at something differently. Um, and I mean, in terms of things that frustrate me, I mean, I think I've mentioned two of them already. It's like the ethical approach, which I think a lot of people struggle with. I think it's the kind of loss of expertise in the field. Um, I think also it's we're often trying to constantly go bigger,
mm,
um, and I think that that kind of like I don't know, impetus to continually grow
yeah,
is not always a good thing.
yeah,
Like I find that there is like kind of a sweet spot that we can hit. I don't know between whatever works for you
yeah.
ultimately, and whatever works for the studio. So I think that's another aspect that bigger is not always better. Yeah.
Yeah, there is. I think that I've had a conversation with a couple of people who've worked in agencies that have like been acquired or had lots
Mhm,
of shift around, and I think there is a real because as a branding designer, you're constantly building things with people,
mhm,
and you're a big part and influence in other people's growth and journey.
mhm,
I think there is a moment in lots of designers' existence where they go, well, actually, I kind of want to start something of my
mhm.
own for myself,
Yeah.
because I've been launching a lot of. Do you think there's any truth in that?
Yeah, I mean, I think every studio and agency I've worked for, somebody started at some point.
Yeah, yeah,
And to your point about all of these new smaller firms popping up
mm,
all the time, I think a lot of times when you're working at somewhere larger, you're expected to be somewhat of a generalist. I think a lot of people want to be specialists
yeah,
and kind of do the things that work in the styles or industries that they really want to. I mean, I like to be able to morph to do whatever.
yeah,
I mean, like the thing that kind of keeps me in the industry is the fact that for 3 months you're working in the crypto industry.
yeah,
For the next 3 months, you're working in like global logistics
mm,
and like um, so, I mean, I think it's up to the individual ultimately, but
yeah.
I can see the appeal of doing
Yeah,
that.
yeah, I think it's just, I guess, a natural progression. In terms of like have you, obviously you've enjoyed your career as a designer and are continuing to do good things. Have you had any like pinch me moments, like where you've gone, wow, this is fucking cool. I love what I'm doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think, something I worked on at my previous studio, Public Address, was, the LA '28 Olympics,
Yes, you said.
like, working for the Olympics is, like, one of those moments where you're like, I own a bunch of posters from, like, the Munich Olympics,
Mm,
from the LA '84 Olympics, like, it was one of those moments where it was like, "Holy shit, I am contributing to, like, the kind of, annals of
mm,
graphic design history." I mean, I never wanted to, like, or expected to kind of, be in that position, so I think whenever that brand launched, it was really like, wow, we're like, in the LA Times.
yeah, yeah.
So I think that definitely was one of those moments for sure.
And did you remember like the first project you worked on that you were like, I'm really proud of this? Like this was a
Um, Let me think. I mean, I think that there were some smaller projects. Like I worked on a few book design projects while I
Mm,
was at CalArts, and like the feeling that you get whenever you like have a physical object in your hand
yeah,
that you worked for like, I don't know, 8 months, a year, to create. So I think like those were kind of the first moments I think where I was like, I'm actually really proud of this.
yeah,
And it didn't just like meet a brief, but it was like kind of a moment of invention
mm,
kind of thing.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like self authorship, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that yeah, I imagine like as an advertising creative, the first time you see like one of your ideas out in the world
Mhm,
must be like an amazing experience.
mhm,
But I even know like when I've worked with a designer who's worked on a project and I see it, I'm like, that's really cool that
mhm,
I, have met the human being who's done that.
mhm.
Like, does it ever lose its charm when you finish something you're like, that's cool that that's out there and people are
No,
no.
no. I mean, yeah, seeing your work literally in lights,
Yeah.
seeing it on a billboard. I mean, it's definitely an ego thing,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
it's something that's appreciated, and
for
I don't
sure.
know. I don't think it ever gets old.
No, yeah, I can't imagine it does. And like recent sort of projects that you've enjoyed bit whilst being at
Mhm,
Mother Design,
mhm.
have you what has been your favorite project so far?
I mean, there are a few that we're working on currently
Yeah, yeah.
that I'm really excited about. I mean, you were mentioning Peer Space as well
Yeah.
uh, another one I'm excited about. We also have this continued relationship with Cadillac.
Oh yes, yeah, yeah.
I like to drive. I like race cars.
Yeah.
And like being able to work with like Cadillac Racing
Yeah,
is
super
really
cool.
kind of a dream come true. So I mean, I think those are kind of the three that I'm like particularly stoked on.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, no, it's really cool, and I think that, consistently the Mother Design New York has made some great stuff.
mm,
On the flip side of all the positive stuff, like what's your best like industry horror story? Have you got any
um, Let me think. In terms of horrific things, I mean, I think that there have been a few instances where I've worked on something for, I don't know, let's say 8 months. And then after you finish the project, you realize it's never going live.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, you got paid, but you never get that gratification of
Yeah.
actually seeing it out in the world. Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably something I mean, it is something that's happened a few times.
Mm.
So, I mean, it is a recurring nightmare,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
just a single horror story.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, that must be I can imagine that is the most
Mhm,
that, like, frustrating
mhm,
thing, especially when you're proud to sort of put your name against something,
mhm,
and, like, in terms of, how how you would sort of shape the future of, like, design studios, what is a new unique model do you think that could
mhm.
become successful or, like
Yeah, I think what I mentioned previously about
Mm.
actually investing in the companies that
Yeah,
we
yeah,
work with, I think that's a new model which I personally am excited about. I mean, also at Mother Design, we have Mother Goods, which is
yes.
like actually producing physical products
That is really
ourselves.
cool, yeah,
So I mean, it's not just like t-shirts and like beanies or whatever.
yeah,
It's more than that. It's actually creating
yeah,
like bespoke, unique objects that have like a reason to exist in the world. I mean, no matter how cheeky they are, like it's exciting to like, I don't know, see products coming out of the studio that are not just t-shirts, I
mm.
guess.
Yeah, I when I first came across the Mother Goods thing, I was like, "This is genius."
Mhm.
Like, because can you explain a couple of the projects that you've worked on through that?
I mean, I haven't. We have a few designers on our team,
Yeah.
named Tian and Teague, who really kind of like, I don't know, like are the heart and soul of that work. um, I mean, we've created like a Kevlar bathrobe, so
Yeah.
that if you're inside your house, then you're protected from stray bullets flying through your window. Um, I think that's one that that definitely comes to mind. I mean, there's also just so many that have never seen the light of day.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, there are I don't know, roadkill carpets, like uh, sunglasses that had a vape integrated into them. Like I don't know, there are lots of things that never saw the light of day for lots of reasons, but yeah, I think that
Yeah.
I don't know. Every project that comes out of it, especially because it's built from essentially a global brief that anybody within the kind of entire mothership can contribute to. Yeah, it ends up being like inevitably something collaborative.
Yeah,
That's exciting too.
I think that they're really polarizing projects, and I
Mhm,
think that often are raising awareness for something,
mhm,
or raising money, and I
mhm,
think that's just a great example of how design can
mhm,
be controversial in a positive way.
mhm. Yeah.
Because I think there's a lot of safe design that exists in the
Mhm,
world, and I guess coming back onto the topics we were speaking about
mhm,
earlier, the Mother Goods projects like hit a space in the market, which I think a lot of brands could actually
mhm.
do better.
Yeah. I mean, I also think, they're ultimately bad design.
Of
Like
course.
the one that we recently launched, Lullabombs, which is, yeah, essentially like a lullaby machine that plays like the sounds of war.
Mm,
It's not going to put you to sleep, which is like the thing that you want something like that to
yeah.
do. So by making something essentially bad design, then you're able to kind of like, yeah, force somebody to look at an issue like children who live in war zones. So yeah, I think that it's definitely something everybody can do better.
Mm,
I mean, there are certain brands that are like built their entire brand off of being provocative. I guess the first one that comes to mind is like Cards Against Humanity. That's
yeah.
they're digging. You can donate to dig a big hole or whatever it is. So I don't know. It's a tool that I think is underused, definitely.
Yeah. I think definitely underused in the kind of branding space, because I think that a lot of ad agencies are always looking for something that divides opinion in
Mhm,
the campaigns that they run. I think some of the best agencies, their sweet spot is in that kind of controversial
mhm,
work that divides opinion.
mhm.
Do you think there's a way that branding agencies could do more of that?
You mean like more controversial work?
Yeah.
Like either, do you mean like either for clients or
Yeah,
um
for clients, I guess.
yeah, I mean it's again kind of like goes back to that expertise issue. Like if you come to someone and say we think this is a good idea and they say no, we want you to do something else, then like that's kind of the end of the conversation.
Yeah.
So I think like if you can get someone to trust you and like get them to think, okay, well, these guys know what they're talking about. um like let's give it a shot. Then I think that that's a way that you could actually do that. But ultimately, like, if you can like take things back to a set of reasons, a set of observations that you establish at like the beginning of a project,
Mm,
then you're able to kind of like not just like work for a client, but
mm,
work with a client
yeah.
to be able to like kind of collaboratively like create a design brief that you can respond to, and whatever the result is of that brief is the ultimately the right solution, because you've kind of like thought about it all the way there.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's I don't know if you've come across a thing called the Chip Shop Awards. Have you heard of them?
No, I don't think so.
So it's more of an advertising thing, but they would it's all about the work that was never made that was a
Mhm,
brilliant idea.
mhm,
So people will present
mhm.
their work that are amazing ideas, and I think that it's more of like a celebration of creativity and it
Yeah.
just being weird, wacky, and wonderful, which I
Mhm.
think there's something really quite nice about that.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, brand new, like, the kind of, like, I don't know, uh, like, the state media
Yeah,
of the graphic design industry,
yeah,
the arbiter of truth, runs this like, series of conferences called First Round, where, again,
yeah.
you're presenting rejected work ultimately,
Mm,
and, I mean, often, you see elements of all of that stuff in the first round in the final work, and, like, that's great, but often you'll also see stuff that, is entirely different and way more provocative or way louder than you see actually out in the world.
yeah,
I mean, ultimately, our job is to do something the most effectively, find the best solution, not the one that we personally want. Uh, so I mean, that's it's cool to see, like,
yeah, yeah.
regardless.
Absolutely. I think that yeah, it's I'd love to kind of witness where, being a sort of fly on the wall in situations where you sort of got a brilliant idea and you're seeing those early concepts and then
Mhm.
what actually eventually happens.
Yeah, yeah.
It must be quite polarizing,
Mhm,
especially when the brand isn't kind of prepared
mhm,
to sort of work with you in the same way. I've got a question around like obviously like with the brand new stuff, I
mhm,
think that design often gets heavy criticism
mhm,
by it. So designers will feedback negatively on other
mhm.
designers' work. How does that sit with you?
I mean, I would love to post my favorite comments from the brand new comment section in like the case study for
Yeah,
the work. Like,
yeah,
I don't know. I would prefer to hear criticism than compliments, honestly. And a lot of the time it's funny, but a lot of the time it's valuable criticism. And like especially when like that is kind of the arena that is permitted,
mm,
so like it's kind of confined to a single space regardless. And I don't know, I think it's the kind of like gossipy, like salacious part of the
yeah.
industry is yeah, people talking shit.
Have you got any examples, or do you remember your funniest bit of feedback that you've read?
Oh shit. No. I mean, I think that one of my favorite kind of subversions of work that I've done is like seeing um uh uh the the kind of reinterpretations of the LA 28 logo. It was like this variable identity that you could replace the A with anything that kind of allowed it to respond to
Mm,
its context. And there's a lot of dissent against the Olympics coming to LA for a lot of valid reasons. And there were police cars or I don't know, bulldozers or whatever it is that ultimately functioned as like a critique of the work itself. And I mean, the kind of first memorable Olympic identity was the Mexico '68
mm,
identity, and there was a lot of protests against that as well.
Yeah.
And they were essentially using that visual system to express their discontent. So that's, I guess, my favorite kind of
Mm.
criticism is when somebody is actually like using the tools that you created in order to criticize whatever the thing
Yeah.
is itself.
Yeah, I think that if you don't have to spend too long in the comment sections of
Mhm,
like new work being released to,
mhm,
to find
mhm,
some kind of hilarious
mhm,
bit of feedback from
mhm,
someone random.
mhm,
Um, and I think that I've kind of got an opinion on, but I think we as humans have digested
mhm,
more design and good design
mhm,
over the last 20, 30 years.
mhm,
Do you think that people are more interested in design? There's a lot of, there's always the chat about the logo
mhm,
that goes even further past the
mhm,
industry specific lot of sort of publications that is in like mainstream media.
mhm.
Where do you think that shifts come from?
I mean, I think that ultimately brands are a bigger part of culture than they used to be, right? Like they used to have a very kind of functional role in society. And I mean, you look at how a lot of brands show up on something like Twitter.
Mm,
Like I think that their role in culture has ultimately changed where they are, I mean, it's like, corporations' legal status being that of people. That's essentially how they're acting at this point. So whenever an identity changes, then a lot of people have something to say about it.
mm.
And again, there are like really hilarious examples of like brands rebranding and the response being like almost unanimously negative because people felt like it was disingenuous
Yeah.
or like a step backwards or I don't know,
One
something
funny
like that.
one I think was the cause they sort of slightly tweaked their logo, which
Mhm.
was like changed, and that was like getting people actually angry.
Yeah.
Like just average Joes
Mhm.
angry that the cause logo had
Mhm.
changed slightly. It was the same when Zara had smushed it all together.
Yeah.
It was like,
When the Gap like put it in Helvetica at the bottom of the square rather than in the center,
yeah,
and it's like, yeah, there's and it's great when these companies actually listen to the criticism too. So yeah, it's funny.
yeah, sweet. Yeah, the one well, that I don't know, you won't have come across this, but it's a TV broadcast thing called Dave in the
Mhm,
UK, and they've recently rebranded and they've made it really like difficult. Like the logo's slightly,
mhm,
and I was like, initially I was like, oh, I'm not
mhm,
sure what's going on here, but then when you actually read into sort of what they're trying to do,
mhm,
like on any of the outdoor sort of campaign work, the logo's upside down,
mhm,
and it's just like stupid stuff like
mhm.
that I think is just funny and quite unique.
Yeah,
Like,
it's bad design.
yeah, well, there we go. We're back to the same point. Well, the final section which we
Mhm,
sort of discussed yesterday
mhm,
is, well, it's been changed. It used to be called elephant vomit.
mhm.
Now it's apparently called stinky fish. So, but I've sort of asked you to go away and think
Mhm,
about this, so I'm intrigued to
mhm.
hear what you think. But is there anything in this world that you absolutely hate?
Mhm. I mean, I love to complain. So yeah, there's a lot. I mean, there are a lot of candidates. I mean, industrial animal agriculture, the police. But ultimately, I think the one that I find myself complaining about the most is New York City. Um,
Okay, good.
yeah. So I don't know. It's not something I don't wish I wish didn't exist. I mean, it's a great place to visit, but I in my view, it's not a great place to live. And I think that's a personal preference, definitely. I mean, I lived in LA for about, I don't know, I think it was 8 years cumulatively. And ultimately, New York is not LA. I mean, it's louder. There are more people in a smaller place. You personally have less space. You're literally living on top of each other. So I think that there are a lot of things that I personally find quite grating about this place.
Yeah.
So I mean,
It's worn
um,
you down over the last how long have you been here now?
about a year and 3 months.
Okay, so
But 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 it was pretty immediate. I mean, it's a bit of culture shock. I mean, there are elements that I like about it. I mean, I'm 40-minute flight away from my parents' house.
Oh, nice.
My girlfriend lives here.
Yeah,
And yeah, those are the things I like
those
about
are
it.
the 2 things. Well, thank you
Um,
very much. It was really great to sit down. I think that, especially I think people will get a lot of rich information from
mhm,
your opinion, and which is quite divisive, which I
mhm,
think is great.
mhm.
But thank you very much for coming on the podcast, and, I'll see you soon.
Thanks for listening to me.